meditations of all of our hearts be always acceptable to you, O God, our strength and our salvation. Amen. Well, every time I come to this passage about the Good Shepherd, I feel the need to refresh my memory on the behaviors of both sheep and shepherds. The images of sheep and shepherds that populate my imagination, and perhaps yours too, mostly come straight out of the English countryside. I always imagine a peaceful, serene, lush hillside dotted with calmly grazing sheep. The setting of Psalm 23 comes to mind. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. This is precisely what a good shepherd would do. Find somewhere pretty with lots of good food and let his sheep take it from there. A shepherd, in my imagination, gets to laze away his days in bucolic scenes of pastoral beauty while his sheep behave themselves politely and predictably. It seems like the easiest job in the world, really. Sheepdogs actually do most of the work whenever the sheep need to be moved to a new pasture. But of course, to imagine sheep and shepherds in this way is to fundamentally misunderstand both, which I have to remind myself every year because our images of shepherds make it look so easy. So let's remember for just a moment some of the intensity of a life lived with animals, of a life lived in service to animals.
This is the constant, all day, 24 hours a day. It's like, is the guard dog staying where he's supposed to be? Are the coyotes staying out? It's a world you manipulate, but you don't control. But that's not your job. I mean, my job's to just be in love with it. And if you take a day off, your brain is stuck here in the lambing barn. And if you go on a date, your brain is stuck here in the lambing barn. The sheep are judgmental and they hate you sometimes. Or you give them what they want and you're their favorite for a while. I assume it's like having children. But these children never grow up, ever. Sit down.
Up, walk up. Yes, come by.
Listen, sister. Shh, lovies.
Well, this is a life far removed from the lives most of us live, from the intense daily demands of living with creatures who cannot take care of themselves. The parents among us probably know it best, as well as those who've taken care of someone toward the end of life, especially if that person has dementia. There is a relentlessness to giving this kind of care, a relentlessness that can ultimately feel like laying down one's life for the sake of another, a relentlessness that can feel quite intensely sacrificial, which is something most of us would rather avoid. Sacrifice isn't particularly appealing to most of us, and yet most relationships that matter ultimately ask of us some kind of sacrifice. And so when Jesus calls himself the Good Shepherd, the one who lays down his life for the sake of the sheep, I think Jesus is trying to say something quite profound about his level of devotion to us, about the intensity of his care for us, about his willingness to take significant risks in order to keep us safe and sound. Jesus is not asking anything of us in exchange. He is simply saying that when danger presents itself, he will put himself in harm's way first. He will lay down his life. Now, the proper biblical response to Jesus caring this much would be to break forth in a song of praise and thanksgiving. And yet, I don't think most of us go there immediately because we have questions, a lot of questions. Why does Jesus need to lay down his life for us? What does he want to protect us from? What are the dangers to which we are so vulnerable? Well, perhaps we might start with the things that can so easily consume us, that can steal bits of our souls, that can diminish the transparency of the divine image within us. In adult formation last week, we learned from Henry Nouwen that we tend to fall prey to three ways of defining ourselves: by what we do, by what others think of us, and by what we have. Let me repeat those. We tend to define ourselves by what we do, by what others think of us, and by what we have, which of course creates an endless amount of suffering, because none of these are a reliable, stable source of identity. Rather, our truest identity is given by God, and it is simply this: we are beloved of God. We are beloved of God. Beloved, the word that was spoken over Jesus at his baptism. Beloved, the word that is spoken over each of us at our baptisms. Beloved, the ultimate truth of who we are, which is under constant assault by a world that seeks to profit from our insecurity, from our lack of secure grounding in our God-given identity. To resist these insidious forces then requires more than someone just telling us we're okay, more than someone cheering us up and cheering us on. Indeed, God came among us in Jesus not so much to provide new spiritual ideas or inspiration, but rather to provide an embodied experience of God's very self, of God with us and God for us. And it was this self that God was willing to lay down, to reveal the seriousness with which God takes our sometimes desperate human predicament, the seriousness with which God takes all of those things that can undermine our sense of belovedness, all of those things that cause us to go astray like lost sheep. Of course, we really don't want to admit that we can be anything like lost sheep. It feels embarrassing that we could be led astray so easily. And so we tend to resist the help that is on offer. We resist the ministrations of the Good Shepherd. Some other people need shepherding far more than me, we like to think, brushing Jesus off. Perhaps the best response to the Good Shepherd's offer of care then is simply gratitude. Imagining that anyone would choose to lay down their life for me, for my well-being, well, it provokes in me a sense of somewhat disoriented awe, a sense of mattering far more than I can easily admit to myself, a sense of being, as a matter of fact, a pearl of great price. And this provocation to see God's image more clearly in myself, God's infinitely dignifying image, well, that does something to a person. Indeed, this growing sense of worth and dignity can begin to generate a desire to help others recognize their own worth and dignity too, to see their own belovedness more fully behind all of the pretense and posturing that can characterize our living in the world. With my own belovedness more firmly intact, I am able to take bigger risks, perhaps even the risk of putting my own life on the line for another, for the sake of their healing and wholeness, for the healing and wholeness of the world. This is what belovedness does. We can begin to hold our lives and ourselves more lightly. We can begin to offer them up freely for the good of others. We are, as the great old hymn renders it, safe and secure from all alarms, leaning on the everlasting arms. We are lovingly tended and cared for by the Good Shepherd. And we know love by this, that he laid down his life for us. What a relief, what a joy, what a blessing. We are home, finally home. May it be so. Amen.